Now, look, it has become incredibly controversial, which of course is probably exactly what Gillette were after, but it has become incredibly controversial, and I think it's because it's touched on something that everyone who is part of a group feels when that group is described or even stereotyped, right? So, and that's probably the angle that I'm coming at it from, is that, you know, whether you're Chinese, a man, a woman, African or Muslim, anytime an ad or some big, huge public display depicts you a certain way, then you're going to have a lot of people that take exception to that, even if there's some truth to it.
And everyone's sort of getting in on the act now and speaking about it, including this Newtown fire station, I think, too.
Yes, that's right. They said, look, obviously, house fires are toxic. Our masculinity isn't. Now, it's quite interesting. Many people said, from both sides, people who hated the ad and loved the ad said, hey, look, we agree with you, right? Because I think many people do have this understanding that masculinity in itself is not necessarily a bad thing, but in its worst form, it can be. And you can make the same argument of a whole lot of different traits and tropes about different identity
Absolutely,
groups.
and I would argue that the ad was actually saying we as a society can do better on the behalf of both men and women, because if they do have those toxic elements, it's bad for men and it's bad for women.
No, it absolutely is, but I guess because that ad specifically targeted men, it didn't talk about, hey, as a society, whatever you may come from, it could stand to improve. And of course there's a case for it. I mean, masculinity in its worst form can be terrible and dangerous and drive us to do terrible things. But you could probably also make similar cases for traits of other groups. For example, I'm Chinese and some, and let's put it this way, some of the opinion articles that I've seen have said something like, look, if this ad made you feel bad, you're a jerk, or you should take a long, hard look at yourself. And look...
But should it really make anyone feel bad? I mean, all it's saying is don't be nasty to people, isn't it? And we can all do better. I mean, some would argue that it was very pro-men, really, in terms of the message it was showing for the future.
A lot of the things in that ad, I think everyone would absolutely get behind. For example, the man jumping in to separate two boys fighting. I think what many people objected to was they said, well, that's just not my experience, though, of masculinity. And that's the problem with making these big general statements.
Although just because it's not your experience doesn't mean it doesn't exist.
No, absolutely. Although I will say that's often the argument people make to stereotype other identity groups. For example, I mean, can you imagine an ad being publicly put out to the African community said, well, perhaps, oh, look at these gangs being formed. Well, maybe if, we can do better and not form these gangs. And you could say, well, that in itself is a perfectly virtuous message, but it's perpetuating a stereotype that many people in the African community may feel is not true.
It's probably no surprise it's garnered so much attention, and I think we could argue about this for a while, Kai, but thank you very much for coming in.
No worries, guys.